We're at StarCast, and this is Fate. And I am here with my man Nate. Now, we all know haters gonna hate, but this brother here, he's still great. We're at StarCast, we're having a good time. I'm with Nathan, and I'm making a rhyme. The N-A, the T-H-A, the N. All the girls in the world wanna be his friend. So Nate's right here, and we go fast, and we are chilling at StarCast.
Ladies and gentlemen, celebrating 5 years as a podcaster, introducing Nate the Great!
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, NateFNGreat. Welcome to the Game Changer Podcast. Now on its own, back on the independent deal, guys. I've been giving a lot of thought as to what I wanted to talk about with this edition, because normally we have the wrestling deal, and I'm joined by Mr. Fretz. But I'm going to say this right now, right off the bat. Mr. Fretz, I'm very proud to say, is one of the staples of Wrestle Addict Radio right now. He's doing Fretzomania with Wrestle Addict Radio. Definitely give them a follow and definitely show them some love. Fretz, love you, man. Thank you for the support. Looking forward to having you back on the show sooner rather than later. So, here was where I was really trying to decide what exactly I should talk about in the first edition of the Game Changer Podcast after War. And it was really tough because I wanted to go back to the original format that was going to be played, which was talking about game-changing moments in wrestling history. And one thing that just really continued to really flourish in my mind was talking about the women's revolution and how it's actually a lot bigger, and the women have gone through a lot more struggles than we could ever hope to comprehend. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, and I wanted to talk about, in my opinion, where it really started and it just, continued to escalate. So that is what this episode is going to be devoted to. It's going to be devoted to the women's revolution, not just with WWE, but in wrestling everywhere, as much as that I can talk about. So definitely you're going to be in for a great show, and I'll also see if there is some time to do some Full Gear predictions, because as soon as this podcast is up, Full Gear, it'll be day of Full Gear, so I do believe. I'll have to definitely look into that really quick, but either way, neither here nor there. Ladies and gentlemen, when did I think the women's revolution truly started? Because a lot of people have thought that it started in 2015 when the women of NXT, Sasha, Charlotte, and Becky got called up. In all honesty, I believe that it truly started before that. Honestly, I believe it truly started 14 years before this even took place. And I'll explain why in just a bit. Because when you really look at the history of the women's division, especially in WWE, women wrestling was more of an attraction than anything. And you know that I'm telling the truth when you think about it, because there wasn't too many organizations back in the day that were really promoting, women's wrestlers. But of course we had trailblazers like Alundra Blaze, aka Medusa, who really paved the way for a lot of the women nowadays. But I will say this, that the women's evolution and the revolution didn't really start until 2001. Why exactly do I say 2001? Well, you kind of look at a lot of the stuff that happened beforehand. It was definitely, women's more acting in the model sense than in the wrestling sense. Because when you look in 2001, though, it definitely shows that they are definitely trying to get the women to wrestle a little bit more and develop more so they can be on the same par as the men. So you kind of look into this. In 2001, it actually started off, very interestingly enough, with Ivory and China, where the two of them were feuding, and they actually capitalized, I believe, on a real-life injury with China, if I'm not mistaken. And the way that they were building this up, where Ivory wanted to just basically break China's neck and she wanted to end her career in wrestling, was such a really good story that was told. Now, unfortunately, I think the match at WrestleMania 17 did not get the proper notoriety that it did. I think Ivory and China definitely deserved a little bit more time and maybe more storytelling in that matchup. But at the same time, it still had a feel-good moment where China won the women's championship, and they continued from there. Now, China would hold on to the title for a few months before eventually retiring from wrestling and leaving the WWF at the time on not so good terms, but they did actually have a really good matchup between Lita and China, which definitely showcased that there was a lot more depth to this women's roster that really they didn't exactly give much credit to. But it wasn't until Survivor Series, in all places, the Invasion storyline, that they started kind of building up the women's division a bit more, and they brought back the Women's Championship, where it was determined in a six-pack challenge between 6 women. You have Trish Stratus, Lita, Jacqueline, Mighty Molly, Ivory, and Jazz. 6 women who were competing for that championship, and they were only given about 4.5 minutes. Now, granted, there was definitely a lot I could say about this matchup that just, well, mainly it's just not given the right time, but I also understand during that time the main focus was on the Alliance versus Team WWF, where the winner was going to, just win the world, basically. That was interesting, and I think they still want to do a deal with Fretz, where we actually rebook the entire Invasion deal for that entire year. Still in the process, so it's still kind of a thinking process right now. But anyway, from 2001 to 2002, we still got, women's wrestling and still some pretty good matches. We actually had a women's triple threat at WrestleMania, which featured Lita, Jazz, and Trish Stratus at WrestleMania 18, which, honestly, was still a pretty good matchup. It was kind of the matchup that had to follow Rock and Hogan, but so any matchup they could have put on there would have just not worked out. I just wish that the women would have been put in a different spot. But during this time, we're starting to see more development from the women's division, and that cannot be overlooked, especially when you talk about the storyline that they had between Victoria and Trish. Now, Trish was definitely one of those women who at first was just more of the pretty face, the eye candy, but as time went on, she definitely became one of the greatest women's wrestlers ever, and she was still getting on that right track. Then you have Victoria, who the two of them definitely did some modeling, and they created a different character in which we had a psychopathic person in this role, and Victoria just played that so well. A lot of people know her better as Lisa. She played that role to a T. The fact that, we got to see her just kill it as a great wrestler, and we also got to get that amazing theme song of All the Things You Said. Oh, just absolutely great. So just wonderful seeing that. And Victoria definitely was a staple in the women's division early on, who definitely was showcasing everything that she could. And like I said, she was a crazy character. She was definitely one of the forefronts to a lot of the characters that we would see nowadays. Maybe not nowadays, but definitely for the future. So then we go from that to Jazz. In all honesty, Jazz was one of those women who could just take a beating and keep on ticking. And I will say this, that I really did love the angle with her and Teddy Long, where yes, they were battling against, whites, battling against the man, and I loved the catchphrase where literally it was, the bitch is back and the bitch is black. I really loved that. That was just one of those things where it's like, great, we're seeing somebody, take initiative here. They're taking the storyline. Just absolutely wonderful to see. And like I said, Jazz is one of those women who could just continue to showcase, women's wrestling at its finest. Especially when you're looking at, somebody who is not, the stereotypical, maybe, big boobs and model looks. No, Jazz was literally one of those women that you looked at and you knew she could just tear you apart with just one glare. She deserves so much more. And she deserves all the credit for everything that she put in the women's division. I am stating that right now. So as we go into 2004, we definitely do see the women's division still having a little bit of a tough time. But one of the staples of that year's feuds as well as matches were all credit to Trish and Lita, who are basically total polar opposites between the two of them. You have Trish, who definitely is representing more like the model figure and just the hot ones, where Lita kind of represented more of the tomboys who loved wrestling and just, didn't care, what she wore. She was just a rebel. It was just really great to see that. I will say this, that I mentioned this in my, my favorite matches going into the last almost 20 years now, where I mentioned that the Raw match between Trish and Lita was just absolutely wonderful. It was a great matchup. It was just absolutely spectacular seeing that. Mainly it is because of the fact that the story itself was just absolutely great. It was one of those things where you wanted to see Lita get back at Trish. You wanted to see Trish get some comeuppance. And to be honest, their first matchup after Lita was done with that storyline where, they talk about lost baby, Snitsky, just horrible. We see Lita gunning for Trish, and Trish and Lita, they headline Survivor Series, and it's a matchup nobody was really expecting, in my opinion. Lita just literally was looking to just destroy Trish. She didn't care about the title that night. It was all about just taking one thing that Trish prided herself more than anything, and that was her looks. And if you remember, she basically broke Trish's nose. I say that with quotations, but it was one of those things where she had to wear that, face mask. Not the one that Cody Rhodes would wear later on in the years, but one that just looked like literally two strands were put on her face and just this one piece of plastic that was bridging between them. It was a bit of a comical break, but at the same time, it's one of those things where it told the story again that, Trish's looks have been damaged because of Lita. As time went on, Lita would get her revenge on Trish for the Women's Championship in North Carolina. Oh gosh, this was such a great matchup. I love it. I could have done without the suicide dive bump. That was rough, because literally for Lita, it looks like she goes for the dive, and when she hits the floor, it looks like she does a scorpion to herself, and I was worried because she had neck issues. It just was rough to see. But Lita would win the women's title from Trish Stratus. It was a great moment, and definitely one of the best matches of 2004. I defy anybody to argue with me on that. I would definitely put that in my top. I would put it in my top 5 of best matches in 2004. That is how far I'd go with that. So we fast forward a little bit to 2006, and Trish, she's still on top of the world. She's definitely back at being, the placeholder for a lot of women, but we're still seeing new faces coming in. Some that, were working well. Then there were others that were just kind of there as the pretty faces. We would actually get a little bit of an exhibition between Trish and Melina at Survivor Series 2005, where Melina would slowly start to get her first taste of wrestling, but also her first taste of what the championship, reigns were going to be like. Definitely going to touch base on her in just a bit, so definitely put her on the sidebar for a minute. In 2006, we definitely see, Trish feuding with somebody else who had a bit of a crazy gimmick, but probably one that surpassed Victoria, a.k.a. Tara, a.k.a. Lisa, that being Mickie James. So Mickie basically was one of those super fans that just created a bit of an uncomfortable at point with Trish, where she just wanted to, be Trish's friend. She wanted to hang out, but then it just turned into something where they were going to, just go further and further to the point where Trish and Mickie kiss, which, that was very unexpected. But at the same time, definitely one of those things where you looked at it and it's like, oh, well, that's something new. That's something you don't really see in storylines. Yes, I know there are a lot of horny guys that were just like, oh, we want to see more kissing with the lace. Just shut up. Just take a back seat. Go to your corner. It built up for a great story and a pretty good matchup at WrestleMania 22, where the two of them were definitely, just out to kick each other's butts. But Trish was also dealing with the mind games that Mickie brought. Oh, and it was just great. Now, there was a controversial moment that happened during this matchup where Mickie grabs Trish's crotch, and then she makes a V deal, and then she licks her. She puts her tongue between the V. Ooh, that was a tough thing. That was one of those things where it's like, ooh, Mickie, you may have went a little too far with that one. But Mickie would end up being the victor in that, and Mickey's career just speaks for herself, because it started off with her being like a stalker and her being kind of a copycat deal. But as time went on, she became her own woman, and she created just this great legacy in wrestling, where she was battling with some of the greats. And she was one of those women that would be a part of a lot of final matches, including the final match with Trish on Raw, and a final match with Lita later on in the year at Survivor Series. So Mickie is definitely one of those workhorses that a lot of people definitely do seem to overlook. But she was one of those women who just, and even still to this day, finds ways to help other women look good, and she definitely finds a way to help build that next generation. And she did that also with Melina, because Melina was one of those women who, had the glitz, the glam, the paparazzi. But I will say that I believe that with Lita, oh my gosh, I'm getting the names wrong. With Mickey's, guidance, as well as the matches that they had, Melina slowly started to really transition into a bigger star, to be honest. And it is kind of one of those things where, Melina, to this day, is one of those women who continues to just absolutely just shine. Because at first, again, she was one of those women who definitely had the look, she was in the modeling. But as time went on, you definitely appreciated the fact that she was always doing more. She would do the splits in the ring for her entrance, but then she would also incorporate that into one of her finishing moves, which in all honesty, I thought was a pretty good move. That DDT, where then she takes one leg and just does a split to the person as they're standing up, that was great. Then she does a sunset flip bump. There's just a lot of stuff that Melina did that I was very impressed with, and I thought, wow, she definitely is getting, winning a lot of fans over, but she's also creating her own legacy as well. Now, as time went on here, we definitely do see the ascension of what I believe is still one of the hardest times to really talk about, but at the same time, gotta mention it, and that was the Divas Championship history, because on Raw, they had the Women's Championship. So they were starting to get more women on both shows, on Raw and SmackDown, so they decided, let's get a women's division going on SmackDown, and let's create a championship for that. They had the Divas Championship, which in all honesty, I'm not going to lie, the best part about the Divas Championship was Michelle McCool. She was one of those women who, with Layla and anybody else that she worked with, she definitely made that Divas Championship just absolutely flourish. Now, some people might argue, Maurice and maybe some others, but and even Charlotte being the final Divas champion. But I truly do believe that what made the Divas Championship worthwhile was definitely women like Michelle McCool. And I will mention one other name. I have to mention this other person's name, but I'm going to get into that a little bit later on, because as we see a women's championship and a Divas championship flourish, we actually got a bit of a different women's division going on, and that being in a little company called TNA. A lot of people know it better as Impact Wrestling, but I refuse to call it anything else other than that. With TNA, they had a lot of women that were coming around. They had women of all shapes and sizes, and I do mean all shapes and sizes. You had, ODB, who definitely was kind of that woman that every guy would love to just hang out with, drink with, and just have a good time with. You had some of the women that looked like the models, like Angelina Love and Velvet Sky. You had the women who were kind of out there and definitely had different characteristics, like Roxy Laveau. Oh my gosh, Roxy was great. You had a mastodon in Awesome Kong. And you had one of the patriarchs and the frontiers of the Knockouts division in TNA, Gail Kim, who was putting on matches every now and then. And I do believe was one of those women who said, hey, let's actually make a division. Let's get more women involved in this. And at Bound for Glory, we saw a matchup that would determine who would be the first ever TNA Knockouts champion. Gail Kim rightfully won. She was one of those women who definitely worked her ass off. She was there for the longest time. She created a great matchup, and she also created that championship. I do know that there's a lot of people that would say there are others that would create the Knockouts championship, but in my opinion, Gail Kim was definitely one of the pioneers who definitely made that championship relevant. And how she quickly made that relevant was because the fact she was feuding with Awesome Kong. That rivalry is still one of the best rivalries that got me back into women's wrestling. And I told Gail Kim this. I said that feud and her and Awesome Kong were the reason why I started really giving more about the women's division. Because in WWE, of course, they had, again, certain women that were in just the modeling deal. And I will say this, I respect them for doing everything they did to try, but at the same time, it just was one of those things where some of them were just there just to kind of be there and to kind of make that Divas Championship better, which, to be fair, it didn't really do much. But Knockouts division was, in my opinion, my bread and butter. The feud between Awesome Kong and Gail Kim was great. You got some other people that got involved, like, again, Angelina Love, Velvet Sky. You had Madison Rayne, who really pumped up her persona, but also the prestige of the Knockouts Championship with her reign when she was doing the, I guess I would say, the retirement deal, because she had like a title versus career deal almost every other month, which, again, was just great. It was very well done. And you look at, some of the future ones where you had, I'm trying to remember what her name was. Oh my gosh, because eventually, you had women like Tara, Lisa, and Mickey. They came down and they stayed their claim for the championship. And, they did their work. They were definitely workhorses that created that made that championship, even more prestigious. So we see more, prestige go on to that. And on the WWE side, we definitely do see, women like Paige, AJ Lee, Charlotte, Becky, Sasha, Bayley, creating some uproar for the women's division, whether it was in NXT or on the main roster. And they created something that just is very hard to really replicate nowadays. It's just going to be absolutely amazing. Just seeing them in NXT and seeing how they just slowly just build up the women's roster again. And, arguably, they're the ones that really started getting the women's division back up in the right direction, because they're the ones that proved that, hey, you don't have to be a model. You have to, really put your craft and train hard to showcase yourself, and they did do that. They were absolutely amazing. And some of their backstories, my God, I mean, hearing Becky Lynch did so many different jobs, including a stewardess, is just absolutely phenomenal. Hearing that. I mean, Charlotte, she's coming from the long lineage of, Ric Flair. You have Sasha Banks, and Bayley, who have just been wanted to be wrestlers for a long time because they were just huge fans. And they've showed, they put in time, effort, and they created something absolutely fantastic with them. So they definitely started an uproar when it came to the women's division. And I will say this, that it wasn't until 2016 that we really started seeing the ending of one era and the beginning of another. But I will get back to that in just a bit, you guys. Going to take a quick commercial break and come back. Continue to talking about the women's division growing with WWE, as well as growing in Impact Wrestling, but also AEW, and as well as a lot of women that you can look back on and say they've definitely done their part and created and made wrestling fun again. So stay tuned. Be right back.
This is the Princess of Pro Wrestling, SoCal Val, inviting you to watch Grown Ass Women TV every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. GAW TV is the ultimate slumber party with me, Lisa Marie Varon, and Mickey James. Plus, special guests like Mick Foley, WWE's Paige, and more. We're live in the YouTube chat room every Wednesday for each episode premiere. So join us, and don't forget to bring a cocktail. Visit GawTV.com for more info. That's GAWTV.com. We'll see you there.
Check out the guys over at Eclectic Media Project. They bring you podcasts such as Musically Challenged. Whose podcast is it anyway? Want to hear something interesting? And their newest podcast, Page 3.14 News. Check them out on Podbean and iTunes at Eclectic Media Project. On their website at www.eclecticmediaproject.com. Check them out as they are the home with a little something for almost everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Coda Jacobs, the crusader and visionary behind a brighter future in wrestling. If you're an honorable and noble public servant like myself, you are listening to the Game Changer Podcast.
What's up, you guys? This is NateFNGreat from the Game Changer Podcast. Welcome back to the show. Talking again about women's wrestling. And to be honest, the women's revolution. I'd said that ever since 2001, it has been a revolution that has made a slow start. And there are some points where it's reached its peak, but then there's other times where it's been kind of a trying time. And one of the trying times was the Divas Championship. Now, granted, there were women that were definitely trying their best to make that championship very relevant and very much so prestigious, like Eve Torres, Natalya, Layla, and many others. But one woman in particular who definitely did make that championship something more of an uproar, other than I would say Michelle McCool, was Nikki Bella. Yes, I'm going there. I'm going there because Ant would probably not forgive me if I didn't talk about his lady. Nikki and Brie Bella, the Bella twins, were two identical twins until differences were made. I'm not really going to go deep into that. I think you probably can figure that out for yourself. And when they had that match with AJ Lee at the Survivor Series in 2014, I want to say it was? 2014. It created a lot of interesting comments because of the fact that for the first time ever we saw a bit of a woman-on-woman action, and no, not quite action in the ring, where Brie kisses AJ, get an elbow shot from Nikki, and then the Iraq Attack, 1, 2, 3. This would start Nikki Bella's long reign as Divas Champion, where she would beat people like Paige, Naomi, and honestly, I'm drawing a blank on this just because those are the main ones that I remember most from Nikki Bella's reign. But she was a woman who definitely embodied what it meant to be a diva. And she was the perfect example of what the Divas Championship should be, and she definitely created quite a bit of moments as well as history. It wasn't until she met the one Charlotte Flair that her reign would come to an end. I do actually remember doing an episode about the Bellas. I believe it was the night that Nikki Bella had her run, where she broke the streak that AJ Lee had set beforehand. And the fact of the matter was that during that time, some reason, the Bella Twins decided to follow me at that point. And for... oh boy, no, I know the reason why. Because I had to endure the reign of the Bella Army, where they were just making comments, and they were just absolutely creating a lot of uproar, a lot of talk, per se, and just really not exactly one of those things where I was enjoying my time on Twitter. So, yeah, that was the thing. But, yep, Charlotte Flair would go on to defeat Nikki Bella and end her reign, and slowly we would get into a transition where women's wrestling would take a different turn, because at WrestleMania 32, we would see Charlotte win the WWE Raw Women's Championship. Now, this is where things get to be a little bit more interesting, because this is where we started seeing a little bit more of history being made, because during that year, we actually got so many different matches for the Raw Women's Championship, and we started seeing a little bit of resurgence with the SmackDown Women's Championship, but at the same time, we wouldn't really see too much build until we would reach a couple years later. But I'm not going to deny the history that the women made, where in that year, they had the first ever Hell in a Cell matchup. They had a Falls Count Anywhere matchup, as well as an Iron Man matchup at, I think it was, I think it was Roadblock. Oh man, that's sad. And the thing about it was that it featured the two same women in Charlotte and Sasha. And they killed it. They really created something absolutely amazing, and they just absolutely killed it. And we saw a lot of resurgences and a lot of different, careers that were flourishing with these championship reigns, like Alexa Bliss, a little bit of Nia Jax. We saw Carmella have a run, which I really hate bringing up, but at the same time, it happened. But also in NXT, we saw the women's division there just flourishing a lot, but it was because of one, Asuka, who was the undefeated, longest reigning NXT women's champion of that entire run. I mean, you just look at everything that she accomplished during that women's championship run, and who the list of people that she beat, whether it was Nikki Cross, Ruby Riott, Ember Moon, Bayley, Nia Jax. The list is just absolutely, it's crazy seeing how much, Asuka did. And unfortunately, it was one of those things where it would not result well for Asuka. Oh boy. But as time went on, we saw the women getting more of a chance to showcase that they can be just as good as the men. And their ultimate test was when they had the first ever Women's Royal Rumble matchup. And you saw just the amount of nostalgia we had in that matchup. It's just great. Because you had, returns like Molly Holly, Lita, Trish, the Bella Twins, Michelle McCool. The list of just how many people were in that matchup, and just how many women, from the past, for the present, and eventually for the future, that just were there to just be a part of history. It was just absolutely great. Now, fast forward a little bit later on during the year, the women would get the ultimate opportunity to prove that they could indeed hang with the big boys. And that was when they had their own pay-per-view known as WWE Evolution. What a night this was, and everybody, whether it's from the Rand Foundation, Wrestle Addict Radio, those wrestling girls, whoever it's been, have definitely talked about WWE Evolution, and rightfully so. This has been an event that has, in honesty, been unfortunately been dubbed underrated because of the fact that there's only been one Evolution. We deserve another. If we can get like one every other year, I'd be okay with that. Because I think that once a year, it would just lose that. It would lose that sizzle, in all honesty. So I'm hoping that we get another Women's Evolution soon. I mean, you look at the headlining matchups that they had in there. Ronda Rousey, who was the Raw Women's Champion at the time, took on Nikki Bella. It was basically a situation where it's like the new generation of women taking on what the embodiment of the women's division was. You had Charlotte versus Becky Lynch in a last women's standing match that was just, too good to ignore. You had Lita and Trish returning to the ring. You had so many women returning in that battle royal, such as Ivory, Molly Holly. I believe Kelly was involved in that as well. There's just so many people. It was just a wonderful night, and we just need more. We need more from that. So having that, and then following up years, almost not even a year later, to the women main eventing WrestleMania, something that was long overdue. But WrestleMania 35, I had the fortune and the pleasure to be there and be able to say that I was a part of history, seeing Becky Lynch, Charlotte, and Ronda headline main event WrestleMania was an honor and a privilege of itself. I don't even care about how that matchup ended. To be there to witness it was just great. I just hate the fact that it rained after that. That was really crappy. And Will Tarashaw from Kings of the Ring will definitely tell you how much of a pain in the ass that was. So, WWE has had an up and down deal when it's come to their women's division. And honestly, you could say the same thing about the Knockouts division for TNA, because you look at the line of women that they had, as time went on. A lot of them were either from WWE, or they had went back to the status quo, which was Angelina Love or Velvet Sky. Some of those other older acts that they had there. In fact, what's crazy is that one of the most viewed videos on Impact's TNA's YouTube library is of a deal that seemingly went too far with Velvet. I think it was with Velvet Sky, Madison Rayne, and Angelina Love. It's one of those things where you look at how these women definitely just showcased how they could really find a way to make people not only notice them, but also make the women's division something to talk about in their realm. It's just absolutely great. So, definitely will say that despite there being some waves in the Knockouts division, there has definitely been some highlights in that. And for me, one of the favorite highlights in my mind for the women's division was the introduction as well as the reign of Rosemary, who was definitely a larger-than-life persona. And even to this day, I look back and I see Rosemary as one of those characters that was so ahead of her time because of how she came on. She definitely looked like this undead creature. And she eventually, the layers started, getting peeled off, and she started showing a little bit more of a human aspect to her. But at the same time, how it started and how it just evolved from there showcased just absolutely amazing. Then you had great women who came through there like Allie, Laurel Van Ness, a.k.a. Chelsea Green. You had people like Zelina Vega, a.k.a. Rosita, back in TNA. You had... Oh man, I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember remember her name. She was Tiffany in TNA, not TNA, and oh my gosh, in WWE. There we go. And she had a bit of an interesting run in TNA where she had some great feuds with Gail Kim, but she also had a deal where she was working with the Dollhouse, was with Jade and Marty Bell. Very interesting. Deal to say the least. Had ODB there, who just definitely again is so vastly underrated and underappreciated. Also, she makes some really good food, so you get a chance to see her truck, definitely order from her. It's just absolutely wonderful. You go into talking about, women's division in AEW, and I think that they're still trying to find their stride because they do have the talent in there. Penelope Ford, Hikaru Shida, Britt Baker, Big Swole, Nyla Rose. So many women on that roster that definitely do deserve a lot more showcasing than they deserve, than they're being given to right now. I truly believe that. Because it's one of those things where you look at their division and you just see the massive array of talent on there, and so much of it's still not being used because they're focused on some of the other aspects of it, like what's going to really have, what's going to really create great moments and great matches, which, unfortunately, have been savored for the men. I mean, tag team wrestling, they've got a lot of teams in there, maybe one too many. And then you got, the TNT Championship, which still is getting some of its prestige, and it's going to be eventually better. The AEW World Title, you see that, and it's one of those things where it's still getting, the right amount of exposure. But there are some points where it's like, okay, I think we can kind of back off from that and give somebody else a bit of attention. So I'm hoping that with AEW, they build that division up again. Because I will say this, that one of the happiest moments of that division was when Hikaru Shida won the title from Nyla Rose. I was very happy to see that because she deserved it. She was one of those women who, in all honesty, I would have much rather have her been the women's champion, the first women's champion of AEW, and just hold the belt forever. Yeah, no, I would have been okay with that. So I'm hoping that they again find more ways to showcase the women on the roster and definitely build up that division more and more every day. Hoping that we can have that. Maybe they had a tournament for the women, which honestly, to be fair, that was one of the few bright shining moments because it's like, hey, we got all these women, we're going to showcase them all here. That's going to be great. And you had a bit of a shock of a victory. I'm not going to really spoil too much of it because I definitely think that people need to go back and watch it itself. Because I was honestly expecting Brandy and Allie to win, but the winning team just surprised the hell out of me. So, for women's division, I'm again hoping that eventually what's going to happen is that it's going to continue to have that just main role where we see them showcased just as much as the men. And honestly, it's not just AEW. There are other times where you definitely do feel like the women are not getting as much time as the men, whether it's in WWE or in TNA. It's just hopefully we can find that perfect balance where we can have everybody showcased in this. And also, don't be afraid to have the women do more extreme storylines. I mean, you literally could have Rock and Austin in women form, and it would be great. I mean, maybe you're not going to recreate that great moment where Austin is coming out with a Zamboni or with a beer truck and doing that. But you can still create some absolutely great moments with the women. And they don't have to be outlandish. They just have to be, well thought out. And they just have to be fun. Something that everybody's going to enjoy. So hopefully as time goes on, we see that difference. And I'm hoping that we do see more with the women's division as time goes on. All right, so I'm going to end the show with doing a bit of a prediction deal for AEW Full Gear, which will be taking place on Saturday. So when this comes out, it will be that night. Anyway, so we have 9 matches on the card. Okay, so this should be pretty good. So let's get right into some of the matches here. We have on the kickoff show, it's the buy-in show, I should say. I actually really like that better. On the buy-in show, we have Serena Deeb versus Allison Kay. I will say this, that I am a big fan of Allison Kay, so I'm picking her to win this matchup. I know that Serena Deeb, she just won the championship from, I want to say it was from Thunder Rosa. on an episode of Dynamite. So maybe it's one of those things where that seems like it's a little bit too soon. But at the same time, I like Allison Kay. Allison Kay is fancy. Just don't say the word Christmas around her. Here we have Orange Cassidy taking on John Silver, one of the members of the Dark Order. And in all honesty, I am hoping that we can have Orange Cassidy get another victory. I mean, he just defeated Chris Jericho in the Mimosa matchup. So let's hope that he can continue that role. In all honesty, I think he's going to just continue being absolutely great. And just, Orange Cassidy's great. Let's face it. We have Hikaru Shida taking on Nyla Rose with Vicky Guerrero for the AEW Women's World Championship. Shida has had the title for a while, and I think that it's going to be a safe bet that Nyla Rose is going to pick up the victory here. And to be honest, if she doesn't, I'm going to be shocked and surprised. But I think that we can get another run with Nyla Rose as champion and Vicky being the mouthpiece for that. I think is going to be a great combination. We have Matt Hardy taking on Sammy Guevara in the Elite Deletion match. In all honesty, this is just screaming absolute match of the, cinematic match of the year. So, that being said, I am going to be going with Matt Hardy, though, because he does very well with these deletion matches. This is kind of his, undefeated deal. I don't even think he's lost a deletion match, if I'm not mistaken. No, I don't think he has. So, this would be one of those things where if Sammy Guevara beats him, it's going to be an upset. It's going to definitely be something that a lot of people would not be expecting. We have the Eliminator AEW World Championship Eliminator Tournament final matchup, in which Hangman Page will take on Kenny Omega. Oh, this is a good matchup. You have the former tag team championship partners battling against each other for a shot at the title. Oh my gosh. I'm going to give this one to Kenny Omega. I would honestly really love to see Hangman Page get back in the world title picture and eventually maybe win the title, but I just see Kenny Omega versus the world champion really being a absolute barn burner. And I'll tell you why when we get to that. We have the AEW TNT Championship on the line as Darby Allin will be taking on Cody Rhodes. Now, when the news broke up about this, that Cody had acquired his last name, his right to his last name, which, geez, WWE had to really do that. Really? Okay. Cody Rhodes is back. I'm very happy for him. Cody had the right to have that name. And to be honest, it's one of those things where, even without his name, the name, he was already creating a lineage for himself. It wasn't one of those things where, he was, the son of Cody Rhodes, and he was basing it off of that. No. He was creating a legacy with his own name. So, it's one of those things where, he's done that with AEW, he's done that with the TNT Championship, which he's a 2-time champion, which is kind of a shock, actually. For this matchup, I'm picking Darby Allin. I think that, in all honesty, Darby deserves the victory after everything that he's been through with coming with in AEW. He's put his body on the line. He's done so much for this company. It's finally time to reward him with a big victory over Cody and becoming only the third person to hold the AEW Championship. Next up, we have the AEW World Tag Team title matchup. FTR taking on the Young Bucks. And in this matchup, if the Young Bucks lose, they will never challenge for the titles again. And Tully Blanchard is banned from ringside. So this is kind of a rehash of what Cody and Jericho had last year at Full Gear. And I think that, in all honesty, it's going to be a situation where we see history repeat itself. I'm picking FTR. And in all honesty, the Young Bucks, in my opinion, they don't really need the tag team titles. I think that they are a tag team dynasty just by themselves. They don't need another, tag team, title notch on their belt. So I'm hoping that is not going to be I'm hoping that is the case where they do not win, but there's also a part of me that wouldn't be surprised if they win on this matchup. I'm just hoping that's not the case, because FTR is great. We have the I Quit match for the AEW World title, in which Jon Moxley takes on Eddie Kingston. The rivalry between these two has been very interesting, to say the least, and I really do like that they're at least adding a little bit more depth to it. So, that being said, Moxley's winning. I'm taking that sold for the reason that we're getting Kenny Omega versus Jon Moxley for the world title, and Kenny's going to be the one that takes the belt off of him. I truly do believe that, and I just think it needs to happen. It just needs to happen. I think that Kenny Omega has definitely paid his dues. He definitely deserves to be the champion at this point. In honesty, I think that having the cleaner come back, him working as a heel, that'd be what's best for business in AEW. Then we go on to what I think should be the main event, and that is the former Le Champion versus the biggest loudmouth in professional wrestling, Chris Jericho taking on MJF, and if MJF wins, he will be allowed to join the Inner Circle. This is the biggest matchup in MJF's career, and I am so looking forward to seeing what comes out of this match. MJF has everything to gain as well as everything to lose. Jericho, he's just going to prove again that he can make anybody into just an absolutely amazing star. So, that being said, the question is, who wins? Whose scarf is better? Who's going to be victorious? And who's going to have the most douchey hair of the night? It's going to be MJF. I really am hoping that we do see MJF, get involved with the Inner Circle, and maybe there comes a point where he actually turns on Jericho and claims the Inner Circle for himself. Who knows? It could very most likely happen, but we'll just have to kind of wait and see. So, MJF for the win. Oh boy. Guys, this has been the first post-war edition of the Game Changer podcast. If you've not, definitely check me out on my Twitter at RealFNGame. I've definitely been trying to continue to be a little bit more proactive on there, and I will continue to do that hopefully with more wrestling tweets as well as some more great stuff. Definitely check out the new episode that I posted up from Wednesday called Well, That Was Random, where I just talked about random stuff on there. It's just one of those shows that kind of speaks for itself, and it's something that I think a lot of people will enjoy. Definitely get a chance to check out one of my co-hosts, Fretzelmania, at Fretz at Fretzelmania. And there's still going to be quite a bit to come before the year's over, guys. I've already talked to one person, and they will be a part of the Thanksgiving special, but I'm not going to quite reveal it just yet. I'm going to probably give it one more week, and then you guys will listen to see who the special guest is. But it's going to be absolutely action-packed. Going into the final month, December, you can definitely expect an interview with Swoggle that I will be posting here on the Game Changer podcast. And so much more, guys. So definitely tune into that. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you guys in the next episode. Bye-bye.